Hello and welcome back to F1 Every Week. I am your host Ben Wevel, and today I'm going to be analysing and reviewing round 16 of the 2022 Formula 1 World Championship, the Italian Grand Prix. Italy is intertwined with motorsport, and Monza was first on the calendar all the way back in 1922, a century ago, as only the third ever purpose-built racetrack. It has been on the calendar for all 72 seasons of the Formula 1 World Championship, and Monza has played host to the Grand Prix on all but one occasion, that the 1980 edition of the race, which was held at Imola due to renovations being made to the Temple of Speed. Monza has earned this moniker thanks to its fast-flowing nature, with turns such as the Curva Parabolica and the Ascari chicane steeped in Formula 1 history. Similarly to Spa, Monza is, as one will have gathered from the nickname, a speed-based circuit, so Mercedes has been very confident at this track in the seasons gone by, with 5 race victories at Monza since their return to the sport in 2010. However, 4 different drivers have been victorious in the past 4 seasons, and this circuit has proven, over the years, to bring mistakes out of even the best, with Lewis Hamilton's lack of vigilance in 2020 costing him the victory, and Max Verstappen's dive bomb move on Lewis last year putting an end to both of their races as well. Now, without further ado, let's get into episode 73. The first thing to pay attention to this weekend was the sad passing of Queen Elizabeth II on Thursday afternoon. Even as someone who is not a massive royalist, the Queen has been a figurehead of my home country for my entire life, and the lives of many others, so it is definitely right that she should be remembered fondly, and that her life should be treated with the utmost respect. To which end, instead of rashly cancelling the Grand Prix as the Premier League did, God, I was really excited for that Spurs City game anyway, F1 opted instead to hold a moment of silence to commemorate the Queen prior to the opening practice session. All team members decided to take part in this act. It somewhat baffles me that, all drivers could be, as well as mechanics, can be persuaded to take part in this, whereas barely half of the drivers on the grid could be asked to kneel in support of We Race as One. Anyway, moving on. And grid penalties were once again the talk of the paddock, with no less than 9 drivers starting lower than they qualified. First off was Max Verstappen, who topped FP3 and took his 5th internal combustion engine of the season, which saw him drop 5 places on the grid, whilst his Red Bull teammate Sergio Perez had double the penalty, also taking an ICE, but being given a more severe one, as this was just his first offence. Alpine driver Esteban Ocon also incurred a 5-place penalty, while Valtteri Bottas picked a 15-place grid penalty up thanks to a new ICE, turbo and MGUH, caused by his DNF last weekend. Mick Schumacher took the same punishment as Bottas with a new ICE and gearbox, having conked out on track in FP2, bringing out the red flags, while his Haas teammate Magnuson also added 15 places to his qualifying tally. And now for the back of the grids. Carlos Sainz, who put in his the best time of the second practice session, took one of these hefty penalties with new controller electronics, a new energy store, gearbox and MGUK. He'll be alongside Lewis Hamilton, who announced pretty early on in the weekend that he would be taking a new full power unit. Finally, Yuki Tsunoda would also start at the back of the grid. It was initially merely meant to be a 10-place grid penalty, after the Japanese driver was reprimanded for the 5th time this year, thanks to him having driven back to the pit lane with his seatbelt undone. AlphaTauri then decided that it was best to take a new power unit as well, but salt was rubbed into the wound on Friday, as the FIA discovered that Yuki had ignored yellow flags in the second practice session, he was reprimanded for yet another time. A few more of those and he could be missing a race. Next, on to 2019 F2 champion Nick de Vries, who had his busiest weekend in 3 years. Firstly, he replaced Sebastian Vettel in FP1, his third appearance of the season, with his third team of the season, and he kept his nose clean, other than a minor mistake at turn 8. Then, on Saturday morning, William revealed that Alex Albon had been feeling unwell, and is currently undergoing treatment for appendicitis. So, the Dutchman will be taking part in FP3, qualifying, and the race itself. This is probably one of the first times that one driver has raced for multiple teams in one race weekend, and also Nick's first race in qualifying in Formula 1. Next on to Ferrari, who, prior to the weekend, announced that their widely praised scarlet-coloured F1 car would be treated to a splash of yellow. Furthermore, both Leclerc and Sainz would be adorned with yellow overalls and helmets, looking like something out of the most recent Minions movie. Many were confused as to why yellow was the colour selected, but the main reason is not as complex as one might have thought. It is merely being used to celebrate 75 years of the Ferrari road car, with yellow the Scuderia's second colour and also the house colours of Ferrari. And whilst the monotonous red of Ferrari's livery was lit up by a tinge of yellow, so too were the timing screens in Saturday's 2 practice sessions by the 2 Ferrari drivers, as Ferrari were 1 and 2 in FP1 and 1 and 3 a few hours later, which, along with Max Verstappen's grid penalty, cemented them as favourites for qualifying on Saturday. Moving on, Red Bull also created headlines this weekend, and last weekend as well, with the announcement that their deal with Porsche was off. On Friday, Porsche made clear that the deal to buy 50% of Red Bull had fallen through, after a joint conclusion was reached. Despite the monetary boost which would certainly have come the way of the team had they opted to go through with this deal, senior figures within Red Bull, such as Christian Horner, Adrian Newey, Helmut Marko, had openly stated that they wished to remain an independent team, and statements in the past weeks had already shed serious doubt upon the partnership. Porsche still seem interested in F1 though, so they will probably need to look elsewhere on the grid, maybe to their VW Group counterparts Audi, in order to join the sport in 2026. Also on the subject of Red Bull, or more specifically Red Bull's junior team AlphaTauri, who took their first and second victories in Formula 1 at Monza with Sebastian Vettel in 2008 and Pierre Gasly 2 seasons ago, they commented earlier this week that they will be bringing in 7-time IndyCar race winner Colton Herta to replace Pierre Gasly if Alpine's plans to bring the Frenchman into their ranks was a success. Colton is an American driver, so Red Bull will have an invaluable asset if they manage to pull off this move, due to the sport's well-documented exponential growth in the States, partly due to Drive to Survive. However, there are a number of downsides to this decision to put all of their eggs in the Herta basket. First of all, Herta is known to make critical mistakes whilst trying to push his car to the limit, a character trait not dissimilar to one of the most successful drivers to ever drive for Red Bull and one of the most successful drivers on the grid at the moment, Max Verstappen. In fact, Lando Norris even commented on this flair of Colton's whilst driving with him in British F4. Furthermore, there is a significant hurdle which Red Bull need to overcome if they wish to bring Colton in, as Colton does not have the required super license points to compete in the sport. This is another very contentious issue, and if the FIA are willing to bend the rules in order to make way for a once-in-a-lifetime talent, then it will once again call into question the validity of the system as a whole. Now on to qualifying, and Verstappen took the fastest time in Q1, dipping into the high 120s, whilst Nicholas Latifi was knocked out in Q1 for the 6th weekend in a row, as well as becoming the second Canadian driver this season to be out-qualified by his reserve driver teammate, the first of whom being Lance Stroll at the opening round in Bahrain, where he was 2 places down on Nico Hülkenberg. On the subject of Stroll, he was down in 18th, while his teammate was only 1 spot above. This the 7th double Q1 elimination for Aston Martin this season, Lance Stroll's first Q1 elimination in Monza, and about the 92nd time Sebastian Vettel has said "no way" after his lacklustre quali performance. The 2 Haas drivers also had a dire day as they locked out the back row of the grid for the first time this season before penalties were applied, mostly down to Kevin Magnuson having the majority of his lap times deleted for track limits violations. Now on to Q2, and whilst Sainz topped the second session as he had done in practice, another former Renault driver, Esteban Ocon, was knocked out in Q2 for the second week in a row, and for the 3rd time in a row at Monza. Valtteri Bottas maintained his poor qualifying form in 12th, only having reached Q3 in 1 of the past 10 races, whilst Nick de Vries was a phenomenal 13th, reaching Q2 in a Williams in his first ever qualifying, showing Williams what they would be missing if they decided to retain Nicholas Latifi for 2022. Zhou Guanyu joined his teammate in Q2 elimination for only the 3rd time this season, and Yuki Tsunoda rounded out the top 15. Finally, on to Q3, and it was Charles Leclerc who took his 17th pole position of his Formula 1 career, and his 8th of the season. His teammate Carlos Sainz, who led after the first runnings, took 3rd position, equalling his best qualifying performance at Monza. The 2 Ferraris were split by Max Verstappen, while Sergio Perez was 4th, all 3 of whom were set to take grid penalties. Hamilton and Russell followed, ahead of the 2 McLarens, Ricciardo putting in his best time since Baku in 9th, and Fernando Alonso was P10. So, after all penalties were applied, the grid was Leclerc, Russell, Norris, Ricciardo, whose best grid position this is since Monza last year, in which he took victory, and giving McLaren a great opportunity for a podium, Max Verstappen, Nick de Vries, who took the best grid position for a rookie ever, Zhou Guanyu, Latifi, who started in the top 10 for the 2nd time this season, the 2 Astons, Perez, Ocon, Bottas, the 2 Haas drivers, Sainz, Hamilton, and Tsunoda. Now for my driver of qualifying, and it's Nick de Vries. What a way to make your entrance in Formula 1. Q2 in a Williams, which is easily the worst car on the grid, in his first ever session, and P8 on the grid. If he managed to score points, Williams would have been utterly ridiculous not to sign him this year for next year. Now for my team of qualifying, and it's McLaren. Not only were McLaren starting 3 and 4 on the grid, possibly giving the opportunity for a repeat Monza, but Daniel Ricciardo finally had a good qualifying. This is just something about Monza. There's just something about Monza which gives Daniel good luck, because not only was he elevated to 4th on the grid, but he also got into Q3 for the first time in 2 races. Finally, for my struggle of qualifying, and it's Kevin Magnuson. Once again, K-Mag has just not been comfortable in the Haas in the past few weeks, with no points in 4 races and now 3 Q1 eliminations in a row. He was partly saved by the grid penalties, but even then he still only started 16th, so again had work to do if he wanted to score points on Sunday. So it was Max Verstappen who won his 11th race of the season and the 31st victory of his Formula 1 career, whilst title rival Charles Leclerc finished in 2nd place, increasing the Dutchman's lead in the World Championship to 116 points. Leclerc got away decently from pole position, opening up a reasonable gap on eventual 3rd place finisher George Russell, who went off the track at turn 1. Max Verstappen managed to make his way up into 5th in the opening lap from his 7th place grid spot, getting up into the podium positions by only lap 3. Verstappen continued on the prowl on lap 5, moving past George Russell for P2 at turn 1, before a VSC came out after Sebastian Vettel retired on lap 12. This only his